whether you're learning how to digitize or how to use software. It's important to understand kind of the core of it, what it does, how it works, so that you can better create things that you want to create. So in this section, we will explore how the FTCU software works so that you can understand how to do things and why you need to use specific tools in order to get the results that you want. This is kind of a complicated thing to explain, so I hope that I do it justice. Basically, what we're going to be discussing in this video is all about outlines, and you've probably seen other videos about talking about creating outlines when you open up designs and different things like that. So hopefully I can make sense of what that is, how it works, because once you know how the software creates the stitches and how to create shapes that you can fill with stitches, it just makes it much easier to create and to do the things that you want to do. So when you create designs in the Floriani software, you will either be creating a line or a shape that's like a closed shape. If you see on the screen here, I have this line here. I have this rectangle here that's a closed in shape. And these are outlines. If I come over here into the sequence view, you can see that these are nothing but artwork, and there's nothing applied to it. It's just an artwork piece. But I can come in and I can convert it to something else. Okay, so if I create or I convert it to a run stitch, if I go into 3D view, it's kind of hard to see, but I can change the color here. But you can see that you have these different stitch points. But if I click and I drag this line, you'll see that outline, that vector art outline. If I come in now with this selected and I convert it to a run motif, you will see that as I click and drag this, all you see is a line. You don't see those stitches. You're just seeing a line. And the reason for that is because really all we have here is this line. The software, even though I've told it I want to do this motif, this is nothing more than a virtual representation of what the stitches will be when I save the design into a machine format. So that's important to understand, is that this is just virtual at this point, and the way we know that is when we click and drag, all we see is the line. The stitches haven't actually been applied to the design yet. The software knows what it's going to do. It knows that it's going to create it and have the different stitch lengths. Everything is kind of determined of what it will do when you save it, but it hasn't done it yet. It's just showing us a virtual representation. So if I come over here to this shape that's closed, I can apply a run stitch, I can apply a motif, I can do a steel stitch border. But notice I click and drag, it's still nothing more than an outline. Yes, you see the stitches here. Yes, you can come over and you can change all these properties, but it's still nothing but an outline at this point. But the important thing about it being a piece of artwork is that this allows me to make changes to it. If it was already applied as stitches, I wouldn't be able to convert it from, say, this steel border to a fill stitch. It's important to have those outlines because basically what it works as is a container for stitches. So it's just a path either for the stitches to be applied to or a container to hold in stitches. A fill stitch is nothing more like this one right here than a rectangle that has stitch data kind of put into it. And it's a container that holds those stitches. So this artwork is nothing but a container for these stitches, but those stitches are not applied yet. They're not actually there yet. The software knows what it's going to do with it, stitch length, underlay, all of that, but it hasn't been applied yet. It's just important to understand this because when you're creating a design, all you're doing is either creating a line or a shape that's closed, and then you're just filling it with the data that you want to be there. So really, you're not creating stitches, you're creating an outline that the stitches will be applied to. So just to give you an example here, if I open up a new page and I come over to my digitizing tools, there's only one tool that functions differently, and that is the manual stitch. And the reason it functions different is because everywhere that you click is where you're telling the needle to go up and down. You're not creating a path and then changing the stitch lengths and stuff like that. You're actually creating the path for the needle to follow. And because of that, you're basically not creating outlines, you're creating the actual stitch data. So how this works is if I select that manual stitch tool, you can see I'm about 5 millimeters. I can do this one about 7, 2, 3. Everywhere that I click is actually where the needle is going to penetrate the fabric. Okay, so if I select it, if I come over to the properties box, I don't have anything that I can really do to it. I can change the size of it, but I can't convert it to something different. I can't change the stitch length. That's already been determined. Basically, and if I come over to here in the sequence view, it'll say stitches. You've probably seen that before if you've opened up a design that was saved into a different format. Basically, anything that says it's stitches, you can't really apply anything to. That's the only tool that is like that. Everything else, like your run stitch, if I create a running stitch, I'm creating the points, and then I'll right click, and then it's just filling it in with data. So in here, it has a 2.5 millimeter stitch length. If I change that to 5, you can see that now the space between is greater. I can change it to 2, and it will shorten that length, and you can kind of see the representation of that, because basically what I have is this line and I'm just applying data to it, and so it's virtual at this point. It's not actually fully applied yet. That's why I could come over and I can convert it to a still stitch. Now, because it's just a single line, I can't really make it a fill stitch. I really kind of need a more enclosed one, but you can see that it's still just a line, and I'm applying what I want to it, but it's still at this point virtual. And the fact that it's virtual, it allows me to change it and to convert it from one thing to another, to change properties, because it hasn't actually created them for real until it's saved. So again, coming over to here, if I even grab a fill stitch, I create the shape, I right click, I can do the angle line, the start point, the end point, and then it creates the stitches. But if I select it, it's nothing more than an outline, a piece of artwork. So what I'm saying with that is it's the exact same thing as coming in here and using the artwork tool like this. That is the same thing. The only thing that I've done is, because I used that fill tool, it actually is showing me what stitches are, but it's nothing different than creating this outline and converting it to a fill. It's still that outline. It's just showing me the data. So I hope that that makes sense, because even when it comes to editing embroidery designs, really you're not tweaking the I'll go back right to that one we just did. You're not actually necessarily tweaking the stitching, you're tweaking the outline a lot. So like in this case, I'm taking these nodes and I'm just extending them out. I'm actually changing the shape. Now there is the editing part of doing the stitches, but again, I'm just changing densities, underlays, all of that. it's still at this point virtual. It hasn't actually saved the data. But it's just important to know, like, even if you're trimming something, if you're copying, pasting, that's why, because it's virtual and it's outlines, that's why I can take this, copy it, paste it, and convert that right over to like a steel. And now I have a border to that fill, because really all it looked at was the outlining shape, and it converted that outlining shape over to those stitches virtually. So that's just how software works. When it comes to editing, even though you see that you have 2 fill stitches here, and let's say that I want to remove the overlaps, you can see I have artwork here and the stitches here. They're the same. It's the exact same thing. I just copied and pasted and made it stitches. So if I come in here and I select this and I move it out of the way, you can see that there are stitches underneath. Okay, but if I right click on it and I go to remove overlap stitches, it will let me choose a distance. Let me just make this 0, so there's no overlap. I would usually keep it at 0.5, but if I hit OK now, notice in the sequence view you can see the little divots taken out. So you can see right here, it didn't actually edit the stitches themselves. What it did is it edited the outline, so it changed the shape of the red, and then it reapplied the stitches to it. It regenerated. We call it regenerating stitches. And so really, we didn't cut through the other stitches. We actually modified the outlines, and then it regenerated the stitches on top of it. So doing this, removing overlaps, is nothing more than taking 2 rectangle artwork pieces and trimming it. That's exactly what it did. So what the software did is it trimmed one through the other, and then it reapplied the stitches to it. So it's kind of it's just important to understand how that works, is that we're really only working with the artwork. We might modify stitches and settings inside of here, but at the end of the day, we're still working with a piece of artwork. And this is just virtual data inside of here. And that really becomes apparent when you start opening up a design that wasn't created in the software. So let's go ahead and take a look at that really quick. Here's this turtle design. You can see it's in WAF format. So one of the things I want to show you is if I select this turtle, and I'm just going to click and drag it, you can see it's all solid. It looks like solid stitches. If I click and drag it, notice those outlines. Look how clean it is. It's showing me the outline shape of each object in the design. And basically what this means is that these are all the shapes, and all of the stitch data is just represented or virtual on top of those outlines. And so it's very clean. I can take any piece, I can move it out, I can convert that to something different. And the reason that I can is because it's actually it has those outlines to it. So you've probably seen before when you open up a design, and let me undo this a couple times so it's right back where it needs to be. And when you open it, it says, do you want to, there's a box for converting the outlines. So let's just take a look at what this means, okay? So when you create a design in the software and you save it as a WAF, if you create it in here, you save it as a WAF, it's going to actually just save the stitch data or the outlines with the virtual representation of the stitches. It's not actually going to convert this design to stitches. It only does that once you actually save it into a machine format. So with this design here, I'm going to go to File, Save As, and I'm going to save this as a PES file. Okay, doesn't matter which one, I'm just going to save it to a PES file. Basically, I'm telling software, okay, I'm ready to go stitch this out onto a brother machine, because that's what uses PES. Okay, so what it's going to do is it's going to take all these outlines that I've created, and I have all these virtual stitches. It's actually going to create those stitches at this point, and it's going to basically remove all the outlines and just turn the outlines into the actual stitches. And it's not going to save the outlines. It's going to become stitches at this point. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save. And I already have it exist. I'm just going to replace it. So now I'm going to go right back into that folder, and I'm going to find that turtle.pes. And this is what I'm talking about on convert to outlines. Every software program, either it will convert a design to outlines so that you can edit it, or it doesn't do it at all. If it doesn't convert it to outlines, you're kind of limited on what you can do with it. Outlines, like we just have learned, are those containers that allow you to change the data inside of. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring it in without converting it to outlines. So I'm going to go ahead and hit open, and it's going to bring that in. It looks the same, looks like the same design. It doesn't look any different. If I come back to this WAF version, you can see it looks very similar. Again, if I click on this and I drag it, it's very clean outlines there. Also notice that if I come into here, this fill stitch is a fill stitch that has underlay to it, but it's just one object that contains all of that information. Okay, so if I come over to this PES, I did not convert it to outlines, right? So if I select it and I click and drag, notice that I don't see any outlines. I'm seeing all stitched data, and that's because I didn't recreate the outlines or have the software recreate it. This was a format that was created to actually stitch a design out. So it took all of the outlines from this one and it filled it in with the stitch decisions that I made for each object. But those outlines are no longer there. And anytime you save it into a format other than WAF, those outlines go away. Okay, so you can have the software convert the design to outlines, but let's take a look at what that does. So if I come back to this turtle.pes and I choose to convert to outlines, basically what the software is going to do is, this is nothing but stitch data because it's the PES. It's going to take a look at this design, analyze it, and say, okay, well, I think this should be, these are the outlines, and I'm going to recreate those so that they can go back and edit the design. So that's basically, the software is redrawing all of them, but it doesn't remember how it was actually created when I created the design. It's having to rebuild it because in this PES design, those outlines don't exist. So it's redrawing it, basically. So when I hit open here, you'll see that it opens up. And I did convert it to outlines. So when I click and drag on it, you'll notice that now you see a bunch of lines. Those are the outlines, but notice that it's not nearly as clean as the original. That's because the software had to try to determine where all the outlines should be. So in the previous one, I selected this object right here. It's kind of grouped together right now, but I clicked right here and I showed you that that contained underlay and like the fill. But if I click and drag this, you're going to notice that underlay is right there. It's no longer attached. It's seeing the underlay as a run stitch, and it's seeing this as a fill stitch. So whenever you're recreating outlines, the software does the best it can, but it's no longer one object. So if I selected this and I applied underlay to it, now if I put it over here, I have running stitch underlay, and then I have underlay again. So I've just double stacked my underlay. It's important to know that because whenever you're editing a design that was created in different software, or you brought in one that was in a different format, you have to pay very close attention to this because it's very easy to stack stitches on top of the other. So I have the ability to edit because it redrew the outlines. It's just no longer is everything attached. So what happens is if I click on this object, you'll see that I have a number of objects here. Let's go to this border right here and let's take a look at it. So you see a bunch of things that are stitches, meaning, you know, that's probably a lock stitch, but I can't adjust anything for it. It didn't create an outline for that. It did for this object, but you can see stitches. Anytime you see stitches, I can't edit those. But notice as I scroll, look at how many pieces there are. There are some satins, there are some fills, there are some stitches, but just look at how many pieces there are, because it tried to rebuild it because it didn't know where those outlines were, because the PES file didn't contain them. If I come back to the WAF version and I go to that same area, there's a number of pieces, but look how clean this is. It's all satins or a run, and it's way less objects. So whenever you're editing a design, it's way easier to edit a WAF file if it was created in that. This is just to show you how important outlines are, and when you're creating a design, you're really just working with a line. Now convert that to artwork. A line or a shape that is closed, and all you're doing is converting that to something. And because those outlines exist, I can go from one object to another without a problem. I can change it up, and the reason I can change it up is because all of this stitch data, regardless if I change things inside of here, is virtual at this point. I'm just working with this outline container or this line, and I'm just saying I want this type of a stitch applied to it. So again, is regardless if you create it using a digitizing tool or you create artwork and convert it to a stitch type, it's all the same. You're really only working with a line or shape. So all you really have to know how to do in software is create these outlines and apply different stitches to them, edit them, but it's just important to know all this data is changeable because it has outlines and it's virtual at this point. So I hope that that makes a little bit of sense. The software is all about outlines. It's all about vector artwork. That's what allows us to create things, convert things, change things up really easily. If we didn't have that, it would be like this design right here that I opened up in the PES format, and I have 0 outlines. I can't modify this design. You can do little tiny things. You can change colors, but I can't change the density. I can't change the stitch length. I can't do a lot of those things because there are no outlines here. It's stitch data. And so it's very important to understand when you're working with a WAF file and you create a design yourself what you have. Once you save it to a different format, it loses all those outlines. So if you bring in a design in one of the other formats, you are either bringing it in as stitches, like in this design, or you're recreating the outlines. It's just not as clean, and you lose a lot of edit ability. You can edit quite a bit, but it's a lot harder. So that's how digitizing software works, like kind of in a nutshell. And so I wanted to shoot this video just to show you just something to keep in mind as you're creating designs, editing designs, or just working with software, understanding a little bit about how that works. I hope that this helps, and we'll see you in the next video.